Welcome to the Emerging Payments Association Asia Fireside Chat on Cybersecurity. My name is Lance Blockley. I'm an ambassador for the association and also run a payments consulting business called the Initiatives Group. Most fraudulent payments on cards occur through a criminal, usually a member of an organized gang, gaining access to a list of card credentials in a database, often at a merchant website, and then using them to buy something online. Similarly, financial losses also occur through ID takeover, when villains gather key pieces of data and information which allow them to impersonate someone, with most of this scavenging again occurring electronically. Both payment fraud and ID takeover raise the issue of cybersecurity and keeping electronic records safe from prying eyes. And this is the topic of our fireside chat today. And to help me throw a few logs on the fireside fire of cybersecurity, I have with me David Hemingway, the Chief Commercial Officer at Indue, a payments company which has the data of many consumers to protect and keep out of harm's way on behalf of its clients, and Mani Amini, the Managing Director of Secure Forte, a cybersecurity vendor focused on security audit and supply chain risk management solutions. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Lance.
So we're going to run through a few questions on this topic with these two experts. And Dave, perhaps we'll start with you. So if you could start by providing some insights into the issues that confront you and your customers, both the clients and the consumers, when a set of payments credentials have been illegally obtained and used for fraud.
Sure, Lance. Ultimately, there are really two factors in all of that. There's the impact on the issuer or the financial institution, and also, of course, the cardholder as well. And they're both impacted, I suppose, in different ways. For the financial institutions, of course, you've got the financial loss in these circumstances. You've got the operational effort to remediate the circumstance, the need to reissue cards, if appropriate, raise chargebacks. And ultimately, they typically suffer a net fraud loss in these circumstances. They may need to do a review of their fraud rules, may also be required to report about the financial loss as well. So quite a bit of cost, I suppose, from the financial institution, both from a pure monetary perspective as well as the operational effort and perhaps opportunity costs that may create. For the end consumer, there's also quite a number of impacts when a card credential is stolen. Of course, the inconvenience. Typically, the card needs to be cancelled. Might take 7 to 10 days, depending on where they're located, for a replacement card to be received. In addition to that, they may have a number of recurring transactions or direct debits linked to that card. In some circumstances, they may have 15 or 20 of those. They all need to be updated to point to a new card. In some cases, there can be embarrassment as well, particularly if the consumer believe that they contributed to that particular circumstance occurring. And furthermore, there are also statistics that show that a lot of cardholders transact a lot less post suffering such an event. So essentially, two main impacts, one on the consumer, one on the financial institution.
Okay. And Mani, your company reviews the cyber defenses of many different entities. What are the common areas of weakness? And how should businesses be addressing these?
Thanks, Lance. I would say bad governance of cybersecurity, especially in financial services, since compliance is the main driver for cybersecurity in these industries. So let's put it into perspective. You have PCI DSS to comply with because you are interacting with cardholder data. ISO 27001 because you have contractual obligations to some major banks. Generate SOC 2 Type 2 when you are dealing with American-based customers. Privacy obligations, CPS 234, and so on and so on. So the fact that matters is that the core and the juice of these compliance requirements are the same. What the company do, they address each one of these requirements on a silo-based projects, rather than achieving them towards an overarching project. As a result of that, massive duplication of effort due to the overlap between these compliances, ambiguity in policies and responsibilities, and complexity, which is way against cybersecurity. So best to stop addressing those compliance and contractual needs in a silo-based projects, rather addressing at the business organizational level. So come up with a program around cybersecurity to address your cyber needs, including compliance. So pretty much walk through one journey to achieve them all.
So you think they should be taking a holistic approach to this rather than just trying to meet the regulatory requirements on each piece?
Exactly.
Okay. And the criminals seem to continuously invent new ways of gaining this valuable data with which to conduct their financial crimes. So how do we as an industry stay ahead of the curve, or is it impossible to imagine what they're going to come up with next? So it's a question of responding as quickly as possible to a new line of attack. How do you think about that, Manny?
Great question, Lance. So I would say the traditional mindset of preventive controls, keep adding controls in an onion base, that's been gone. And that only generates false sense of security. So rather, we have to change our mindset from preventive to detection and response. If you want to be ahead of the curve, you have to think, even now that we are talking, they already exfiltrate our data, our crown jewels. So most often the time of the breach and the time that you detect that you had a breach is around 1 year in a less mature industries. So our recommendation is that continuously test and assess your cyber posture. How effective are your cybersecurity controls? Increase your detection and response capabilities around incident response, how quickly you can detect it, respond, and recover from a cyber incident. And also, the other thing is about knowing that your suppliers, know exactly what's being handled by your suppliers, what level of access do they have, and how far you have to go with them. My last recommendation is around exercising tabletop with senior management team. So when the breach happens, they know how to lead. They know what they are talking about to the media. They know how to command and communicate across the organization.
Okay. So it's impossible to anticipate. You've just got to have the best reactions that you can.
Totally.
From a financial institution perspective or a payment processor, not trying to do it yourself is a key point in all of that. It's obviously a very complex area. It's a very important area. So partnering with organizations like SecureFort are important if you want to get it right. You need to engage the experts and the SMEs in this space.
Okay. So, I mean, forever in payments, there's always been this balance between making it a convenient way to pay and putting security around that. But from my point of view, it seems that that balance, which was kept in check for quite a while, in recent years has tipped violently in the direction of convenience. And indeed, providers are actually competing on being more and more convenient. So is it possible for payments to remain secure without some sort of security hurdles being inserted now and again? Dave?
Look, I believe it is, Lance. I think the main difference here is the technologies and techniques used in the past are no longer sufficient for the future. There is a way to balance convenience and security, but it takes a different approach. Ultimately, some of that convenience that you're referring to is things like real-time account openings, it's instant issuance of new cards digitally, it's real-time transactions like what NPP bring. The security of application management in all that space is absolutely key, and in particular identity management or identity verification. If that's done very well and very strongly, then you can mitigate a lot of those risks initially. A key approach for this is using the right tooling. Machine learning type tools, particularly when they're coupled with sophisticated biometrics tools, are a very good way of reducing the friction that you introduce into that experience while still getting a lot of the benefits of having that additional security to prevent some of these fraudulent activities from occurring. If we look at two-factor authentication, for example, it's a pretty blunt instrument and by itself is not necessarily adequate moving forward. It's susceptible to things like phone porting. In addition to that, it does very little for scams. And this is obviously in the circumstance where an individual is coerced to actually complete a transaction, where obviously they will pass the two-factor. Using things like behavioral analytics and those biometrics pieces can greatly assist with that. If a customer is doing something out of their normal behavior, then systems can detect that and protect some customers from themselves. So a key point in all of that is the right tooling coupled to the right other tools. You can get a lot of benefit where you mitigate or minimize the amount of friction you add while still providing that convenience that customers demand.
And it seems at industry level, the industry has adopted a sort of a risk-based approach. So when you look at contactless cards, there's a limit where after which you have to put in a PIN. And I know that at least on my internet banking, when I put a new biller in for BPay or I do an overseas transaction, two-factor authentication steps in and they just step up the security around that. Manny, any thoughts on this balance of convenience versus security?
That's a good one, especially you touched on the risk-based approach. I would say the risk culture within the business must be shifted. So right now they look at cyber in a paranoid, they feel like that's all about horror story, but cyber can help the business to lift up in an opportunistic way. So they have to think about, rather than when you come back with those risk indicators, rather than horror stories, how can be convenient, how can we make it pass the message that it's an opportunity for the business? So doing the following actions is going to bring us from point A to point Z over there.
Okay.
Perhaps, Lance, just to add to that risk-based approach that you mentioned, with the right tooling, you can risk score certain circumstances. So some of those examples you provided, maybe two factors not required for that, because based on the behavior of the individual, what they've done in the past, they may actually be quite secure transactions and very low likelihood of being fraudulent. And that's some of the benefits these tools can bring, in that you don't necessarily need to step in with friction in all circumstances. It really does depend on the individual and their past behavior.
And any sort of final advice that we can give to our viewers on how to defend their data and to stop the villains getting in? I
think to jump in there, I think the very short answer to that is take it seriously. Over the past couple of years, Indju's invested very heavily in this space, significant uplifts in our governance, with ISO certification in particular, 27001. We've brought on a lot more InfoSec resources at Indju. We don't try and do it all ourselves. We leverage Deloitte Security Operations Center that supports us. We've got a strong focus on response plans, playbooks, and we test these along the lines of what Marnie mentioned before, is you need to assume that this can happen and be ready if it does. We also have a lot of frameworks that apply to our third-party suppliers to ensure that they don't introduce risks into our business. So when you boil it all down, it all comes down to, it's a considerable cost to implement, yes. However, the cost, both financially and reputationally, is far greater if there is a security event. So take it seriously. So you don't want to end up on the front page. That is very, very true, Lance.
And Manny, ideas from you?
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Look, we know it's very tough out there, especially due to pandemic right now. And perhaps you don't put cyber at the top of your agenda, but that's exactly why you should put it at the top of the agenda, because that's what cyber criminals try to do. Taking advantage out of the noise right now in the market. So as Dave said, please just take it seriously.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your comments. Hopefully that's been helpful to our audience, and look forward to talking to you again. Bye for now.
Thank you very much, Lance.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.